Good evening, I'm Anna Kalczyńska and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. Ukraine experienced a massive power outage after two key power plants were attacked overnight by Russia. Cities such as Kiev or Kharkiv had their electricity supply cut for as much as 16 hours a day, while repairs were carried out. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. The Slovakian Prime Minister says his country will not back the plan to use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. The Ukrainian Nord Stream blast suspect hunger striking in an Italian prison is in critical condition. And the United Kingdom pays tribute to fallen Polish heroes of World War II. Ukraine is grappling with one of the most severe energy crises since the start of the war. Massive Russian missile and drone strikes have devastated power infrastructure across the country, forcing generating capacity down to near zero just as temperatures begin to drop. Let's go live to our correspondent in Kiev, Oz Katerji, for the latest on the ground. Good evening, Oz. So what's the situation like in the capital right now? How are people coping with these extended power cuts? And what steps are authorities taking to restore electricity?
Well, again, it's a very difficult weekend for the Ukrainians, with the Ukrainian authorities saying this was one of the largest ever attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure since the war began. Hundreds of missiles, hundreds of drones, more than 45 cruise missiles targeting parts of the country. As you said, the capital, Kyiv, the Kyiv region has experienced some parts of it 12 hours worth of cuts. So a really sustained problem for the Ukrainian government to deal with. Now, the energy minister, Svetlana Hryntchuk, spoke last night saying that the situation had somewhat stabilized, but again, the problems persist. Today, President Zelensky used his nightly address on Sunday to talk about energy workers and rescue workers who are working to restore power across the country. So the Ukrainians are very aware of how important the work that's being done to try and bring that capacity back online is, but there is still a larger question, which is that even if this capacity is restored, how much of the winter is going to be spent dominated by Russia continuing to attack these same facilities? It's not like they can pick up and move a thermal power plant to a different location. So this is going to be a sustained issue for the Ukrainians. And I think that's the bigger concern, rather than a weekend of power cuts. It's what's the rest of the winter going to be like with Russia continuing to target Ukraine's energy facilities. Back to you in the studio.
Oz Katerji from Kiev. Thank you so much and stay safe, Oz. Meanwhile, the diplomacy efforts continue and the question looms, could the Ukrainian-Russian negotiations take a new turn? The recent successful Washington charm offensive of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán would suggest a meeting between US and Russian officials is not yet off cards. It comes as Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico says his country will not back the plan to use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Our defense correspondent, Zuzanna Jurek, has the details.
While Russia continues its relentless attacks on Ukraine, including ongoing strikes on energy infrastructure, Moscow's key foreign policy official Sergei Lavrov is suddenly coming to the Americans with his tail between his legs. On Sunday, it was reported that Lavrov is ready to meet with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. This comes after rumors of a fall from grace began brewing following Lavrov's Hungarian fiasco.
Putin had hopes for the second summit after Alaska in Budapest with Trump, to seek this kind of rapprochement between Russians and Americans. And Lavrov took such a compromising stance, showing no signs or even of readiness to negotiate in good faith.
The scrapping of the imminent Budapest summit results from a tense Lavrov-Rubio exchange on October 20th.
During this conversation, Lavrov was uncompromising. He was very tough. He was like, in the best Soviet tradition of Soviet diplomacy, like Mr. No, very conservative, very hard line approach, very tough approach, with no seizing ground for any kind of reasonable compromises with Americans.
Following Hungary's successful charm offensive on Friday, with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán securing a one-year exemption from US sanctions on Russian oil, it would appear that the meeting between Trump and Putin may not be off the table just yet.
Now we are in quite a good position to open up a new chapter, let's say a golden age between the United States and Hungary.
We're talking, but we'll report on that later. Meetings with Putin. We were talking about that with Viktor. He understands Putin and knows him very well. And I feel that, I'm going to let you say what you think, but I think that Viktor feels we're going to get that war ended in the not-too-distant future.
And it would appear that this pro-Kremlin offensive is bound to continue amongst Europe's Moscow-aligned leaders, as Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico vowed to vote against the €140 billion reparation loan financed by proceeds from frozen Russian assets currently being mauled by the EU. These views, however, diverge from the broader bloc-wide outlook on Ukraine.
It seems like there's an understanding in many European capitals that a certain level of support to Ukraine should be maintained over the long term.
And as diplomacy seems increasingly a cat-and-mouse game, a clarification is in order.
In general, I think that it would be very, without exception, almost any Ukrainian would say that if it was up to him or her, he would ask the Europeans to take the Russian threat very seriously. Don't wait. Get ready now.
And it seems that these stark warnings have not only had an impression on European capitals, with the US Secretary of Defense drawing poignant historical parallels.
This is a 1939 moment, or hopefully a 1981 moment. A moment of mounting urgency. Enemies gather, threats grow, you feel it, I feel it. If we are going to prevent and avoid war, which is what we all want, we must prepare now.
For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
So, Vladimir, thank you very much.
The suspect arrested in Italy on charges of severing the Nord Stream 2 pipelines is in critical condition, continuing his hunger strike. Serhii Kuznetsov, a diver and former Ukrainian army officer, claims his rights are being violated as he is not being provided with medication necessary to sustain his health. Germany is calling for his extradition. Italian courts are dwelling on the matter, with Ukrainian officials also involving themselves in the situation. Anastasia Yanchenko reports.
10 days have passed since Serhii Kuznetsov, suspected of involvement in sabotaging the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, declared a hunger strike due to what he calls violation of his rights while awaiting extradition to Germany at a Rimini detention center. Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner Dmytro Lubinets posted on Telegram that the situation is becoming increasingly complicated.
Fundamental rights are being violated. The situation of Serhii Kuznetsov in Italy must be resolved. I met with Halina Kuznetsova, the wife of Serhii Kuznetsov. She reported that Serhii continues his hunger strike and is in critical health condition.
Serhii Kuznetsov, a diver and former Ukrainian army officer, was arrested in Italy in August on a European arrest warrant issued by Germany in relation to the Nord Stream incident. The Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines bypass Poland and the Baltic states, delivering Russian gas directly to Germany. The pipelines were sabotaged 6 months after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
The legal reasoning here is that the Nord Stream pipelines were civilian property. The counter-argument is that it was a legitimate act of self-defense by Ukraine, which had already been attacked by Russia since 2014.
At the end of October, after reviewing the case, the Bologna Courts of Appeals ruled that the former Ukrainian officer should be extradited to Germany. Kuznetsov's defense appealed the decision.
This case is not only about one man's fate, but about the very credibility of the European system of judicial cooperation. Mutual trust cannot be blind. It must rest on effective control of fundamental rights, or it becomes complicit in their violation.
Italy's position stands in stark contrast to Poland. A Polish court rejected Germany's extradition request for another Ukrainian suspect in the Nord Stream case, Volodymyr Żurawlov. He was released and cleared of all charges by the court, a move welcomed by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
Jeśli Ukrainiec walczy z Rosją.
If a Ukrainian fights against Russia, he should be praised, not arrested.
Areszt.
Subsequent investigations into the incident led by Sweden and Denmark were closed without identifying the suspects. The German probe, however, is still open, but experts call it mistake.
The real crime was that the pipeline was built, and that was the biggest geopolitical mistake of Germany in the decade of 2010 to 2020.
The Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner said he had referred the matter to Ukraine's Foreign Ministry and Italy's Justice Ministry, calling for Kuznetsov's immediate release. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
A minute of silence, wreath-laying and a salute. Britain's King Charles, Prince William and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer paid tribute to fallen Polish heroes from the iconic 303rd Squadron. Of nearly 3,000 pilots who flew in the Battle of Britain, Poles were the largest group of foreign nationals supporting the British Air Forces in what's been called one of the turning points of World War II. A story by Diana Skaya.
These were the solemn scenes at today's Remembrance Sunday memorial event in the United Kingdom. The commemorations, held every year on the Sunday closest to November 11, also marks 80 years since the end of World War II and pays tribute to those who lost their lives in both world wars and later conflicts, and the courage of those who fought shoulder to shoulder with Britain's forces. Here in Poland, that legacy runs deep. At the RAF Liberator Memorial Stone in Warsaw, British Ambassador Melinda Simmons joined Polish officials to pay tribute to the Allied forces who died helping the 1944 Warsaw Uprising.
It is about remembrance, so everybody wears one in the week up to Remembrance Day, which is on this day. And Remembrance Day is about remembering it was initially established for First World War, but has recently come to mean remembrance for all people who have died in violent conflict. And so it's got very universal meaning that way. But the other meaning it has is future-looking, and it's a symbol of peace.
The ambassador says the spirit of remembrance also reflects the close bonds between the United Kingdom and Poland and their continued unity in standing up for freedom in Europe.
We still work as closely as we ever did. Those relationships are as close as they ever were, and we all want and are working for the same thing, which is for Ukrainian people and for European people to live in peace.
Among those remembered, the legendary Polish 303rd Squadron, the highest-scoring fighter unit of the Battle of Britain, whose bravery helped turn the tide of the war. Speaking to TVP World, historian Alina Nowobilska says their story still captures the imagination of future generations.
People remember there were more than just British pilots. These pilots went through incredible difficulties to try and even get to England, let alone fly planes in the Battle of Britain, because that's what they partook in. They partook in the Battle of Britain. It was a very hard and a very difficult fight for them. Many pilots were lost. Many pilots were even lost during testing.
Their bravery and optimism, she says, still serves as a source of inspiration.
They were pushed out of Poland in 1939. They had to escape, because either that or they'll end up in a prisoner of war camp. I mean, you can see in Ukraine all the brave soldiers coming out of there as well. And it's something that the 303 Squadron were just steadfast.
A day of solemn reflection and enduring gratitude for those who fought for the freedom that Europe continues to defend today. For TVP World, I'm Diana Skaya.
Despite the strong standing of the Polish economy, the country's healthcare system could be at a breaking point if funding isn't aggressively ramped up. Reports of denied coverage and a €3 billion shortfall this year alone are circulating, with the government forced to step in to close the gap. Piotr Miczczuk has more.
Poland is not the only country where patients complain about long waiting times and insufficient quality of treatment.
Well, that's a bit sick.
This is a mess, isn't it?
There is a general problem with treatment, with getting to see a specialist, and above all, with getting tested.
Financed mostly through mandatory contributions, the Polish health insurance system, called the National Health Fund, has now faced a formidable financial challenge, as a result of which some patients have been denied medical services.
In some facilities, doctors received unofficial or official information that they should not add new oncology patients to these drug programs.
One can only imagine the implications this backlog may bring. Also for other patients who had their planned surgeries for less serious conditions postponed or cancelled.
If an inguinal hernia is not operated on in a timely manner, it can lead to very serious complications, peritonitis and even sepsis or death.
In response to the public uproar, the ministry dismissed claims about cancer patients being denied treatment.
We do not confirm reports of postponing oncological treatments or sending away oncology patients. As a rule, oncological services are unlimited.
Amid the crisis, Poland's finance minister Andrzej Domański met with health minister Jolanta Sobierańska-Grenda to seek ways to boost funds for medical services. As a result, the finance ministry earmarked nearly €1 billion in an attempt to seal the gaping hole in the healthcare budget.
For now, the talks concerned additional measures and an extra amount of €830 million. The aim is to release the amount so that, together with the funds that had been transferred earlier, it would ensure the financing of medical services in 2025.
The whole situation has fueled criticism from the opposition, including some from the right-wing Law and Justice's power broker Jarosław Kaczyński.
They are turning patients away, cancelling procedures for people whose lives are at risk, and the National Health Fund is going bankrupt.
But is it really bankrupt? The Polish healthcare system is heavily underfinanced, needing an extra injection of money every year. Despite a precipitous annual GDP growth, Poland's health-related expenditures are among the lowest across Europe. But the situation is not new, experts say.
It's a neglect that has been happening for years.
But what should Poland do to give its healthcare system a new lease of life? Experts indicate the solution lies in investing more in the system and tapping into the digital opportunities that today's world offers.
A lack of investment can be easily solved with the amount of the data we possess today, with predictive analytics we have opportunity to run today, and more importantly, thanks to digital technologies that we can equip patients.
The government is likely to manage to close this year's shortfall of more than €3 billion. But next year will be even more of a challenge, given estimates saying that the gap in 2026 will amount to more than €5 billion. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This historic call by US President Ronald Reagan in Berlin materialized a few years later, paving the way for a bright, peaceful future. Not peaceful forever, though. Fast forward to present, the world faces another facet of the Cold War, but the fall of the Berlin Wall remains a stark reminder that any war ends at some point. Aisha Abachi brings back the events that led to the fall of one of the most symbolic and yet realistic frontiers that had divided Europe for 36 years. Aisha Abachi.
Come here!
These images seem to belong to another lifetime. Yet, they were taken only 36 years ago.
Today, we therefore decided to establish a rule that makes it possible for each citizen to leave the German Democratic Republic.
At a live press conference on November 9, 1989, this remark triggered the spontaneous dismantling of the Berlin Wall.
It was not actually the decision to let the Eastern Germans go out of the Eastern Germany freely. He mentioned the regulation that should allow Western Germans to enter Eastern Germany.
After the Second World War, Germany was divided into two states: the Federal Republic of Germany in the West, backed by Western democracies, and the German Democratic Republic of East Germany under Soviet influence. Berlin, although deep inside East Germany, was also split in two. West Berlin became a small island of freedom surrounded by the Communist East. Erected in August 1961 to stop people fleeing East German authorities, the wall that had divided families and a continent for nearly 3 decades crumbled before the eyes of the world.
Ich sage ja, das Schönste ist, dass wir es erleben können. Ja?
Das ist nicht zu fassen. Das ist nicht zu fassen. Inzwischen gab es so viel Trauer durch die Mauer in vielen Familien.
The fall of the wall was considered a critical moment in Germany's reunification and bringing down the Iron Curtain, and a striking visual symbol of communist rule unraveling in Central and Eastern Europe. Eventually, the Soviet Union itself would collapse. Nowadays, the remaining section of the Berliner Mauer have become the East Side Gallery, a colorful memorial featuring iconic and popular pieces of art. And during the annual commemorations, the peaceful nature of the change remains a key highlighted aspect. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
Russia continues its relentless attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, but at the same time is signaling readiness to a comeback to the negotiating table. Acting almost as an active mediator, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán not only secured a one-year exemption on the ban of Russian gas purchases for Hungary, but also left Washington with a perspective of a second attempt to a Trump-Putin meeting in Budapest again. To discuss the latest events, I'm joined by John Sweet, retired military intelligence officer and co-founder of Intrep 360. Good evening, sir, and thank you for being with us here on TVP World.
Hi, good evening, Anna. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Always a pleasure. So let us begin with the latest. Russian missiles and drones attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have a devastating effect, obviously, on millions of Ukrainians. However, Kiev responded with a drone counterattack overnight, leaving some 20,000 Russians without power. Do you believe that we are going to see more of such retaliatory blows deep in Russia, and what impact can they have?
Sure. Clearly, from a Ukrainian perspective, we're going to see more deep strikes against oil refineries and production facilities for drones. We're definitely going to see that, but we're also going to see what we saw last night with Russia. They're going to continue their assaults with drones and then also with missiles against infrastructure, energy infrastructure in Ukraine, but also civilian targets. Looking at the Ministry of Defense last night, they said 458 drones were fired and 45 missiles. And of those that were fired, 89% of the drones were successfully engaged, but only 20% of the ballistic missiles were successfully engaged. So once again, we're back to where we were at the very beginning of this war, with Zelensky calling for a no-fly zone in order to stop those 80% of ballistic missiles impacting energy infrastructure as we enter the winter months.
Right. Last week brought some sharp criticism of European action, or rather inaction, starting from Anders Fogh Rasmussen, comments on coalition of the waiting instead of willing, and Jens Stoltenberg saying that allies are fearing escalation with Russia more than fearing Ukrainian defeat. So would you agree? Is Europe doing enough for Ukraine?
As a whole, I believe Europe is doing what we would say is their fair share. They are providing munitions, they are providing aircraft, they are providing Germany in particular air defense assets. But right now it's just not enough. They need to continue to provide it. Standing on the sidelines and cheering Ukraine on isn't the best technique. They're going to have to be actively engaged. And when I say actively engaged, I go back to the no-fly zone. Right now, that no-fly zone is preventing, if you will, or the lack of a no-fly zone is allowing Russia to hit those targets deep within Ukraine. But Ukraine does have, immense capability as far as reaching out and striking back into Russia. The difference is one's a strategic target and the other is becoming more of a tactical target by means of the drones that the Russians are using.
Well, Sergei Lavrov said the Kremlin is willing to talk again to Donald Trump. Russians, in the meantime, infiltrated Pokrovsk, as we know. They pound Ukraine with drones. So does frontline assessment help them to push forward with maximalist demands? Since the failed Budapest talks option last month, in what way has the situation changed?
Well, the situation has changed just by the exchange of terrain there in Pokrovsk. Look, Lavrov got to sit in timeout for about 3 days, and now he's back in the mainstream, once again reaching out to the United States saying we want to talk. Interesting enough, last Friday is when the Pentagon told President Trump, that they had sufficient stockpiles of missiles, Tomahawk missiles specifically, that one capability, that singular capability that Russia does fear. So the Tomahawks are bringing them back to the negotiation table. That's the leverage. But the defense that's being put up by Ukraine, particularly in Pokrovsk and other areas around there, in which they refuse to cede any terrain, and they are inflicting enormous casualties upon Russian soldiers. But the difference is the cost calculus in human lives is something that, quite frankly, Putin doesn't respect, and he's willing to commit more. So more needs to be given to Ukraine so Ukraine can continue their defense.
So far, Pokrovsk remains to be probably lost by the Ukrainians. Vladimir Putin needs a trophy, no matter the cost. So what impact could this victory for the Russians have from the psychological perception of the war by the Russians and by the Ukrainians? We're talking about the loss of Pokrovsk.
Sure, it's a much needed victory, if you will, for Putin. But then again, let's also look at this in context. Bakhmut was lost in 2023. Avdiivka was lost in 2024. So Pokrovsk is just, in a sense, the next town, the next village. But nonetheless, it is the next, and it's another step forward into the Donetsk region that must be secured. Now, it's a strategic crossroads, both for rail and also for highways. So it's significant, at least from Putin's perspective, to get that win, to assure his supporters that he can still win, and he's making progress to justify the loss of Russian soldiers. But it's also critical for Ukraine to withstand those assaults, and through their mobile defenses to resist as much as they can before they may or may not have to withdraw from the area in order to fight the next fight.
So Pokrovsk has been compared by some strategists and analysts to Hougoumont, a small city near Waterloo. So do you believe this comparison is valid? Do you think that those defenses here in the Donbass are very important for Ukrainians? How critical from the strategic point of view is this region and the city itself?
Well, yeah. Well, absolutely. It's a gateway to Odessa and other strategic points within the region and in the Donbass region. So it's important that they can maintain their defense and to guard those lines of communications to ensure that they can reposition forces throughout the region. We know right now that Russia's putting a lot of stake into this. There's upwards of 110,000 Russian soldiers that are in the area that are being fought significantly by Ukraine, mostly from drones and close fighting within the cities. And we've seen that Ukrainian special forces are in the cities trying to uproot those forces that have infiltrated in. But it's close fighting, it's urban fighting, and it's bloody and it's significant. But Ukraine is going to stand their ground. And again, they need assistance for ammunition in other areas, but it is significant that they hold their ground.
So lastly, let's discuss the recent Hungary's Prime Minister visit to Washington. It seems to just have proven how effective Viktor Orbán is. So despite joint European allies' effort and respective bilateral meetings with Donald Trump, no one in Europe seems to have such a favorable ear in Washington that Viktor Orbán. Why is that, do you think?
He certainly does, but he also panders to the president. He tells the president what he wants to hear, and the president responds to that. I think the decision to give him a one-year exemption is not helpful, at least for Ukraine, because he continues to put money into the Russian coffers in order for them to continue the war. So from that perspective, it doesn't help. But again, the president is trying to come to some sort of resolution. He thinks maybe that the best course of action would be to try Orbán. And Orbán obviously is an apologist for Russia. He likes the cheap energy. He's going to lobby for Russia. Now, I don't believe the majority of European allies feel the same way towards him as President Trump does. But nonetheless, that was the outcome of the meeting 2 days ago there in Washington, D.C.
No response from the Washington so far. We are expecting an answer from Donald Trump's administration as to the next meeting in Budapest. Well, we're going to wait and see. Thank you so much, John Sweet. Have a good evening. Retired military intelligence officer, co-founder Intrep 360 has been with us here on TVP World. Thank you, sir, and see you soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna.
And thank you for watching. And please stay tuned to TVP World for more comments and interesting conversations. See you soon.